The Daughters of Cain by Colin Dexter. Read by Kevin Waitley. On Mondays to Fridays, it was 50-50 whether the postman called before Julia Stevens left for school. So at 8:15 a.m. on the 25th of May, she lingered a while at the dark blue front door of her two-bedroom terraced house in East Oxford. No sign of her postman yet, but he'd be bringing something a bit later. Occasionally she wondered if she still felt just a little love for her ex-husband. Especially had she so wondered when, exactly a year ago now, he'd sent her that card. "Don't forget," he'd written inside. "We had some good times too." If anyone, perhaps, shouldn't she tell him? Then there was Brenda. Dear, precious, indispensable Brenda. Yes, there would certainly be one envelope lying on the welcome doormat when she returned from school that afternoon. No one at school knew of her birthday. She received no birthday greetings from a single soul, either in the staff room or in any of the 6 classes she taught that day. Yet there was, in 5C, just the one pupil who did know Mrs. Smith's birthday. Knew it well, for it was the same as his own. In the previous Sunday Mirror's horoscope column, Kevin Costin had scanned his personal key to destiny with considerable interest. Gemini, maximum mental energy helps you through to a hard-to-reach person who is always close to your heart. Play it cool. Maximum mental energy had never been Kevin's strong point, but if such mighty exertion were required to win his way through to such a person, well, for once he'd put his mind to things. At the very least, it would be an improvement on the brute force and ignorance approach he'd employed on that earlier occasion, when he tried to make amorous advances to one of his schoolmistresses, when he tried to rape Mrs. Julia Stevens. At the age of 17, today, Kevin Costin was the dominant personality among the 24 pupils of both sexes comprising Form 5C at the Proctor Memorial School in East Oxford, and only rarely was his conduct less than positively disruptive. KC was what was written in red capital letters in the girls' loo. Kevin Costin, karate champion, king of the condoms or whatever. When Mrs. Stevens walked into 5C for the first period on the afternoon of her birthday, the whole class, following a cue from Kevin Costin, rose to its feet in synchronized smartness. The hum of conversation cut immediately, as if some maestro had tapped his baton on the podium. And there was a great calm. "It's only me," he'd spoken into the rusted, serrated entry phone beside the front door. He'd heard a brief, distant whirring, then a click, then her voice. "It's open." He walked up the 3 flights of shabbily carpeted stairs, his mind wholly on the young woman who lived on the top floor. The bone structure of her face, the pallid cheeks, eyes a sludgy shade of green like the waters of the Oxford Canal, nose tip-tilted in slightly concave fashion, disfigured as McClure saw things by 2 cheap-looking silver rings, one drilled through either nostril. At the second knock, she rose from the bed, straightened her left stocking, and was now opening the door. Within only a couple of minutes, opening her legs, too, as she lay back on the constricted width of the bed, her mascaraed eyes focusing on a discoloured patch of damp almost immediately above her head. She'd rarely felt more than a minimal physical attraction for any of her clients, but she was fonder of this particular fellow than any of the others. Indeed, she'd once surprised herself by wondering if, when he died, well, he was nearly 67, she might manage to squeeze out a dutiful tear. It had not occurred to her at the time that there are other ways of departing this earthly life. It had not occurred to her, for example, that her present client, Dr. Felix McClure, former ancient history don of Wolsey College, Oxford, might fairly soon be murdered. Only one communication, it appeared, was awaiting Julia Stevens when she returned home that same day, just after 5 p.m. A brown envelope containing a gas bill. The white envelope, unsealed, lay on the table in the living room, and beside it was an iced cake, the legend, "Happy Birthday, Mrs. Stevens," piped in purple on a white background. Although Brenda Brooks had been Julia's cleaning lady for almost 4 years now, she had never addressed her employer as anything but Mrs. Stevens. Addressed her so again now, just as on the cake in the letter folded inside the NSPCC birthday card. Dear Mrs. S, just a short note to wish you a happy birthday, and I hope you will enjoy your surprise. Don't look at it too closely, as I had a little accident and the icing isn't perfect. My husband decided to pick a fight a few weeks ago, and my doctor thinks he could have broken a bone in my hand, so I can't squeeze the bag very well. Have a lovely day, and I will see you in the morning. Can't wait. Love and best wishes, Brenda. Brackets, Brooks. Julia looked down lovingly at the cake, and suddenly felt very moved and very angry. The injury was hardly of cosmic proportions, yet in its own little world way, the whole thing was so terribly sad. Yet something warmer, something deeper inside herself prompted her to immediate action. She fetched her broadest, sharpest kitchen knife, carefully cut a substantial segment of the cake, and ate it all straight away. The sponge cake was in 4 layers, striated with cream, strawberry jam, and lemon butter icing. Absolutely delicious. And she found herself wishing she could share it with someone. 10 minutes later, the phone rang. I didn't say nothing in class, miss, but I want to say happy birthday. Would you like to come along and have a piece of birthday cake with me, Kevin? Just try stopping me, miss. The phone went dead. Julia retraced her steps to the living room, where she cut 2 more segments of cake. Cut them with the same knife, the broadest, sharpest knife she had in all her kitchen armory. Much earlier that same day, Detective Sergeant Lewis had found his chief sitting well forward in the black leather chair, shaking his head sadly over the one remaining clue in the Times crossword. Can I help, sir? Extremely improbable. Well, don't you want me to try? Reluctantly, Morse handed over the crossword, and Lewis contemplated the troublesome clue. Kick in the pants. 3 and 5. 3 of the 8 letters were entered. Blank I, blank blank, L, blank S, blank. A short while later, Lewis handed the crossword back across the desk. Nothing had come to mind. After Lewis had gone to look into some burglaries in North Oxford, Morse stared down at the crossword again. Seldom was it that he failed to finish things off, and that within a pretty smartish time, too. All he needed was a large scotch, and the answer he knew would hit him straight between the eyes. But it was only 8:35 a.m. and it hit him. Scotch! As he swiftly filled in the 5 remaining blank squares, he was smiling beatifically, wishing only that Lewis had been there to appreciate the coup de grace. But Lewis wasn't. And it was only many months later that Lewis was to learn, and then purely by accident, the answer to that clue in the Times crossword for the 25th of May. A day, as would appear in retrospect, on which so many things of fateful consequence were destined to occur. It was to be only the second time that Morse had ever taken over a murder inquiry. What's wrong with Phillotson? Lewis had asked as they'd driven down to North Oxford. It's his wife. She's had something go wrong with an operation. When the super didn't think he could cope with the case. Well, he couldn't, could he? I reckon he'd have been about as competent in this case as dyslexic proofreader. I like that, sir. Original, is it? Morse grunted. In fact, it had been Superintendent Strange's own appraisal of Phillotson's potential, but as ever, Morse was perfectly happy to take full credit for the bon mots of others. After all, Strange himself had probably read it somewhere, hadn't he? Smoothly, the main door of the maisonette swung open on another case. And as Lewis stepped through the small entrance hall and thence into the murder room, he found himself wondering how things would turn out here. Certainly it hadn't sounded all that extraordinary a case when, 2 hours earlier, Detective Chief Inspector Phillotson had given them an hour-long briefing on the murder of Dr. Felix McClure. McClure was almost 67 at the time of his murder, knifed, as Morse would be able to see for himself, in quite horrendous fashion. The knife, according to pathological findings, was unusually broad-bladed and at least 5 inches long. Of such a weapon, however, no trace whatsoever had been found. Blood, though, oh yes. Blood almost everywhere. Blood on almost everything. Blood on the murderer, too? Surely so. Blood certainly on his trainers, with footprints, especially of the right foot, clearly traceable from the murder scene to the staircase, to the main entrance, but thence virtually lost, soon completely lost on the gravelled forecourt outside. Had the murderer left by a car parked close to the main door, or on a bicycle chained to the nearest drain pipe? Inside, well, again, Morse would be able to see for himself. Evidence of extraneous fingerprints? Virtually none. Entry via the main door, with McClure himself admitting whomsoever, not Philipson's word, be it man or woman. Someone known to McClure, then. Most likely. Time? Well, certainly after 8:30 a.m. on the Sunday he was murdered, since McClure had purchased the News of the World and the Sunday Times, like Morse usually did, at about 8 a.m. from the newsagents in Summertown. Each of the two news sheets was found, unbloodied, on the worktop in the All-Mod-Con's kitchen. Preliminary findings from the pathologist suggested that McClure had been dead for 20 hours or so before being found at 7:45 a.m. the following morning by his cleaning lady. Witnesses? Questioning of the tenants of the 8 luxurious apartments comprising Daventry Court, built in Daventry Avenue in 1989, had produced no information of any value. Not all that much to go on, Philipson had admitted, coming to the end of his briefing. Yet all the same, not without some degree of pride, laying a hand on 2 green box files filled with reports and statements, and a plan showing the full specification of McClure's apartment, supplied by Atkinsons, surveyors, valuers, and estate agents. The sitting-cum-dining room, the murder room, 12 foot by 17 feet 2, as stated in Atkinson's doubtless accurate specifications, was very much the kind of room one might expect as the main living area of an Oxford don, divorced, no children. Books almost everywhere, on floor-to-ceiling shelves. Not enough space, really, for the many pictures. For a while, Morse stood by the brown leather armchair, saying nothing. "Do you know how many walking sticks plus umbrellas we've got in the hall stand here?" shouted Lewis from the tiny entrance area. 14. How on earth? For me, Lewis, coincidence in life is wholly unexceptional. You know that by now, surely. Lewis said nothing. He knew well where his duties lay in circumstances such as these, to do the donkey work. So he started to go through all the drawers and all the letters and all the piles of papers and the litter bins, just as earlier Philipson and his team had done. 2 things of interest, Lewis finally informed Morse, and Philipson himself had pointed out the potential importance of the first of these anyway. A black plastic W.H. Smith telephone index. Lewis opened it at random at the letter M. 6 names. Lewis sighed audibly. Still, it might be worthwhile ringing round, provided there were no more than half a dozen or so per page. He pressed the index to KL. 7, with 6 of them L, and just the 1 K. And that, interestingly enough, entered as the single capital letter K. Who was K when he was at home? Or she? There's one pretty simple way of finding out, suggested Morse. Lewis picked up the phone and dialed, and was answered immediately. "Yeah? What do you want?" A woman's voice. Have I got the right number for Kay?" "Yeah? She's no here, is she?" "No, obviously not. Look, I'll try again later." "You a dirty old man or something?" Lewis quickly replaced the receiver, the colour rising in his pale cheeks. Morse, who had heard the brief exchange clearly, grinned at his discomfited sergeant. "You can't win 'em all. Waste of time." "Lewis, you learned she was a she, probably a she with the name of Kay." "I didn't. A she of easy virtue who old Felix here spent a few happy hours with. Furthermore, she's a local lass, judging by her curly Oxfordshire accent." "But I didn't even get the woman." Morse was silent for a few seconds. Then he looked up, his face more serious. "Are you sure, Lewis? Are you quite sure you haven't just been speaking to the cryptic Kay herself?" Lewis shook his head, grinned ruefully, and said nothing. Morse had got it wrong, of course. Morse nearly always got things hopelessly, ridiculously wrong at the start of every case. But he always seemed to have thoughts that no one else was capable of thinking. Like now. Anyway, what's this other thing you've found? But before Lewis could answer, P.C. Roberts stuck a reverential, unhelmeted head into the room. "There's a Mrs. Wynne Wilson here, sir, from one of the other flats. Says she wants a word. She said Inspector Phillotson didn't really want to know, like." "Really? Then she's, well, a bit deaf, like?" "Like what?" "Pardon?" "Oh, forget it." "Shall I show her in, then, sir?" "What?" "You know what happened in here, don't you? She'd probably faint, man." "Doubt it, sir. She says she was sort of in charge of nurses at some London hospital." Nevertheless, Morse decided to interview Laura Wynne Wilson, should that good lady allow it, in her own ground-floor apartment. And the good lady did so allow. "And what exactly have you got to tell us?" bawled Morse. "Please don't shout at me, Inspector. Deaf people do not require excessive volume. They require only clarity of speech and appropriate lip movement." Lewis smiled sweetly to himself as the small, white-haired octogenarian continued. "What I have to tell you is this. Dr. McClure had a lady friend, a fancy woman, as we used to call it. She came to see him 3 or 4 times in the last month, always at 7:30. And you actually saw her. Actually is a ridiculous word, isn't it? It's a weasel word, Inspector. It means nothing whatsoever. A space filler. Whether I actually saw her, I don't know. What I do know is that I saw her, all right?" Lewis was enjoying the interview immensely. "Can you tell us anything about this woman?" "Let's say I found her interesting." "Why was that?" "Well, for a start, I envied her. She was less than half his age. A good deal less, I shouldn't doubt." "And I wonder," thought Morse, "how old you are, you old biddy." "And I am 83 in December," she continued, "just in case you're wondering." "I was, yes," said Morse, smiling at her, and himself now beginning to enjoy the interview. "The other thing that struck me was that she wasn't at all nice-looking. Quite the opposite, in fact. Very shabbily dressed. Miniskirt, right up to—" "The top of her tibia?" supplied Morse. "Absolutely. And she had a big old shoulder bag, too." "I wonder what was in that," thought Morse. "Anything else you can remember?" "She had a ring in her nose. I could see that. For all I know, she could have had 2 rings in her nose." God help us all, thought Morse. "But I'm not sure about that. As I say, my eyesight isn't what it used to be." "I wonder what it used to be like," thought Lewis. Morse got to his feet. He had only one more question. "Were you looking out of the window on Sunday morning? You know, about the time Dr. McClure was murdered?" "No. On Sunday mornings I always hear the omnibus edition of The Archers on the wireless. That's from 10 to 11. Lovely. Have a really good long soak and hear everything again." Dangerous thing, that, having a radio in the bathroom, thought Lewis. "It's a dangerous thing, they tell me, having a wireless propped up on the bath rail, but I do so enjoy doing silly things now that I'm old." It had not been much of a contest. Lewis appreciated that. But from his scorecard he had little hesitation in declaring Mrs. Wynne Wilson the winner, way ahead of Morse on points. Quite mistakenly, of course. "What do you make of that, then?" asked Lewis, when the 2 detectives had returned to McClure's apartment. Morse appeared to be disappointed. "I'd begun to think he was a civilized sort of fellow, you know." He gestured vaguely around the bookshelves. "But he wasn't." "Well, you mean this woman he was seeing?" Morse's features reflected disapproval. "Rings in her nose, Lewis. Pretty tasteless, isn't it? Like drinking lager with roast beef." Glancing across at Morse, Lewis saw the chief abstracting a book from a set of volumes beautifully bound in golden leather. A volume of verse, by the look of it. And with his usual competence, Lewis resumed his own considerable task. It was Morse who finally broke the silence. "What did you make of her, then, Mrs. Wynne Wilson?" Mrs., sir? Asked Lewis slowly. Morse threw an interested, inquisitive look at his sergeant. Go on. Well, I'd noticed from the start that she wasn't wearing a wedding ring, as you did, of course. Of course. But I couldn't see any pale skin where the ring had been before she took it off. You noticed that too? Me? Your eyesight's far better than mine. Well, it makes you wonder, though. You reckon she was making it up about her marriage? It wouldn't surprise me, sir. And apart from that, she seemed a pretty good witness. Her mind's pretty sharp. She got you weighed up, all right. Lewis, when will you learn? She's a phony from A to Z. It was obvious she wasn't deaf at all. She heard everything I said. She didn't hear me. She didn't want to hear you, Lewis. Well, if you say so, sir. And what about her eyesight? Kept telling us she couldn't see half as well as she used to, but that didn't stop her giving us a detailed description of the woman who came to visit McClure. She knew she'd got a ring in one of her nostrils at 20-odd yards, Lewis. Why don't you think she's making all that up too, sir? Good point. Morse looked down at the carpet briefly. But I don't think so. That bit rang true to me. In fact, I reckon it was the only thing of any value she did come up with. She's not even been a nurse. How can you say that? Miniskirt up to her mid-tibia. Your tibia's below your knee, Lewis. You know that. But she doesn't. Never been near a nursing manual in her life. And, Lewis, most important of all, she claims she's an Archer's addict. But she doesn't even know when the omnibus edition comes on a Sunday morning. Both men became silent again. And soon, Lewis was feeling pleased with himself, for he was beginning to realize that the second thing he'd found for Morse was looking far more promising. And Morse himself, with melancholy mien, sat ever motionless, his eyes staring intently at the open book of Latin poetry. When he was a boy, well, when he was 15, Morse had fallen deeply in love. The long relationship had been so wonderful, so formative, so crucial overall, that when, 3 years later, he'd been called up for national service in the army, he'd written a daily letter to his girl, only to learn on his first weekend furlough that one of his friends had been boasting about the sensually responsive lips of his beloved.